don't talk very much. And it's a good idea because it's really going to be a great event. It's on November 16th and 17th. And like I say, last time we got scientists from ICRAC, which Medea will explain to you, and we had representatives even within the State Department came out and gave their version, which everyone needs to hear all kinds of versions. And so it's quite interesting, and I've been working with Code Pink for an awful long time, and it was probably the best thing I ever did with them. And this second drone summit, now we've gotten much better at doing these things. This one will be really amazing, so I hope you will sign up. And also you can buy a book up front, and the deal will sign it at the end. Sliding scale, $10 to $20. And if you want to spend more money and write a check, you can take it off donate it to Code Pink, and you can take it off your income tax. Okay.
Greetings, everyone. I am not going to say it for that. I just have a few words. I'm here to welcome you guys to the Social Justice Center. My name is Vittorio Reyes. I'm the Executive Director of the Social Justice Center.
Yay.
We are super thankful to have Medea Benjamin here and be hosting all of you guys. The Social Justice Center has been here in this building for 25 plus years, supporting grassroots radical organizing, and people like you that make it so we can continue to do it for the next 25. So I'm just here to welcome you and thank you guys for coming. And Jessica and Angelica. So thank you guys.
So sort of thank Victoria for letting us use the space today. We're really happy to be here. My name is Jessica. As Jeff said, I am going to kind of set the context a little bit for tonight before Angelica introduces Medea, who we're really excited to have with us this evening. So I'm a local organizer here in the Capital District with the Organization for a Free Society. That's what I do in my personal time. Instead of kind of, we have the trifolds over there for anybody who wants to have a little bit more of an in-depth understanding of what OFS is and kind of, what the shared politics is that we rally around. I could read that to you, it would probably be kind of boring. So what I'm going to do instead is just tell a little bit of a personal story about why, I'm involved in OFS and why I think it's important, why it's something that is important to me. So like I said, I'm the local organizer here in the Capital District. I work statewide on issues of worker justice, but more broadly, issues of social and economic justice. The kind of niche that my organization builds is connecting social justice work that's being done in faith communities to broader social justice work that's being done in the labor movement, but then in community groups as well. So you can imagine there's a really large spectrum there, and a lot of what I spend my time doing is trying to convince people that the struggles that they're working on or experiencing or interested in are connected to the struggles that other people are working on or interested in or taking a part of. So in coming together and thinking about the idea of what the theme of tonight was going to be and what our idea in inviting Medea here to speak was going to be, we were really speaking a lot about intersectionality, this idea that everything's kind of interconnected. And as an organizer, to me, intersectionality is really about community building, right? It's about us as a community and the different ways that we experience being a community. Not how we experience being ourselves, but how the experience that we have in our daily lived lives kind of connects us to the other folks in our community. And just the fact that, even though our struggles might manifest in different ways, we might feel compelled to work on different issues, we might be involved in different things. We're really all kind of working on the same thing. Some of us might work on issues of prison justice or issues of food insecurity or patriarchy and gender expression, but ultimately, what ties us all together is the fact that these systems of oppression that we face are all interconnected. And I remember realizing that for the first time a while ago and just feeling this soul-crushing, overwhelming kind of, wow, this is great, let's just throw our hands up. It's kind of like the Hydra, right? Even if you were able to kind of chop off the head of hunger if hunger had a head, you're still going to have these other heads coming up, like the person industrial complex, or gender nonconformity issues. And it took me a little while to kind of get past the fact that that really is a morale-crushing understanding that no matter how hard you struggle, there's going to be kind of another head that's going to come up and swerve around and get you from a different angle. Which is kind of a bummer, I know. It's kind of a bummer. So, to me, well, you can look at it from that perspective. It is, everything's futile, and you might as well just not organize for anything and not do anything because everything is going to be terrible all the time because you have this huge giant umbrella here in all directions. What I try to view this as other things that are disadvantaged. You can look at things that you can look at qualities that something has in one light as a disadvantage, and in one light as an advantage. And to me, one of the things that's really good about this overarching interconnectedness of these systems of oppression is that it gives us something to unite under, right? It gives us this mechanism for really, enabling us to understand and see the value in creating a mechanism through which, we can all support the work that we're doing collectively as a community and as a group that's coming together and fighting under the same struggle, even if it has a different face or a different side or a different light. So really, the reason that I'm here as a member of OFS, and to tell you this really long, kind of not very well thought out, rambling story about myself, is, that I share this core belief that, any effective structure that we're going to come up with to work as a community to address these overarching systems of oppression, need to be a space in which it needs to be a space that's as diverse as the hybrid that we're facing. And so really, one of the things that drives me as an organizer is the idea that any truly representative voice of a community is going to be a voice that's a safe space for the entire diversity that that community encompasses. So I'm going to introduce Angelica, who's going to introduce Medea. We do a monthly community roundtable where we try to bring together different work that's being done in the community, locally here in, not just in Albany, but throughout the larger Capital District. So if anyone would like more information, we have flyers over there. We also have a sign-up sheet. I'm going to let Angelica.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm here to introduce Medea Benjamin, who many of us know is the co-founder of Code Paint and Global Exchange, which are both organizations dedicated to international human rights that take a holistic approach to creating change through activism and education. She's the author of multiple texts, but tonight she's here to talk about drone warfare, Killing by Remote Control, which was published in 2012, and as we heard earlier, you can purchase one over at the table. Which brings up for me a lot of important questions about the value of life. White life versus the life of people of color, and the life of Americans versus the life of people of color outside of those borders. And I was especially struck, after looking through this text, by the challenge of mainstream notions of self-defense. And those kind of brought me, because a lot of the justifications for use of drones abroad is the idea that we're defending ourselves. So that immediately called to mind Trayvon Martin, C.C. McDonald, and countless others who don't qualify under those particular parameters, and who have a similar identification to those folks who are being struck by drones abroad. And I'll be very quick. International human rights violations like remote control, killing by drone, reflect and reinforce those imperialist values that are operating here under those particular circumstances that I was just speaking about. So please give Medea a warm welcome, and she's going to discuss her book and address issues of imperialism, patriarchy, and drone warfare through first presentation around her book, and then a question and answer period, which include questions from the audience and pre-prepared questions from OFS. Thank you.
Well, it's great to be here with so many wonderful activists that I know, like Joe here, who is with us in Pakistan and does such great work around ending war. And Connie was with it in Afghanistan. And many of you other activists that have been involved in so many things, and I love the way that you introduced this as the intersection of so many different struggles. And one of the things that we wanted to do tonight was for me to go quickly through this so that we could get to the discussion part, because in the talks that I've been giving, and actually this is an updated book that just came out 2 months ago, so it's got a lot of new material in it. But in the other talks I've been giving, this takes an hour, so I'm not going to breathe. I'm going to be very quick, and hopefully we will really spend our time on the discussion. And also because a lot of you know a lot of this, that drones are the new weapon of war post 9/11, that drones come in all kinds of sizes, the little wasps, the size of a bird, they can be folded up in a soldier's backpack. They are being touted as lots of commercial uses as well as humanitarian uses, tracking endangered species, stopping fires, and finding your grandfather with Alzheimer's who's walking through the streets and nobody can find him, but the drone will. Yet here is the mainstay of the drone industry, which is the drones that are designed to kill people by remote control from very comfortable headquarters in an Air Force base in the United States, where soldiers are killing by day and then going home to their families in the evening and think, isn't this a nice, easy way of waging war? But what is happening on the other end of things? Well, we don't know a hell of a lot. What we do know is that only 2% of those people being killed are on this high-value target list that the president comes up with every Tuesday when they go in Terror Tuesdays and nominate people to be killed. And that we have been using these drones in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, the Philippines, and setting up drone bases all over the world. The issue of Afghanistan is very interesting because as the troops are supposed to be withdrawn, the number of drone strikes has really jumped up here, giving you the impression that the troops might leave, but the drones will stay. In the case of Pakistan, which is the place outside of the war in Afghanistan where the drones are being used the most, this is where the Obama administration really took charge and veered from the Bush administration policy of picking people up and throwing them into black sites or into Guantanamo, and instead just killing people. So most of the drone strikes have been under the Obama administration. This is our group, Joe, that was in Pakistan. Where's that shock of white hair? They're not in that picture. Maybe you're taking the picture. But we had 34 wonderful Americans who went to Pakistan, met with people like this photographer who risked his life to go and take pictures of drone victims. In fact, not the ones who were hit directly with the drones because there's no picture to take, it's just pieces of flesh, if that, but people who have been hit by the shrapnel. And these are some of the children's pictures that the U.S. public never gets a chance to see. And this is one of the people that we met with, who is a journalist for Al Jazeera and other news outlets, that told us about the drone strike that hit his family's house, killed his brother and his son, who were teachers in the local village. And he said, imagine the lesson that was learned by the students that night. This is some of the people whose relatives were killed at one of the drone strikes, where the community was meeting in a communal setting called a jirga to resolve a local problem. This looked to people thousands of miles away like a bunch of no-good Taliban, and they sent in the drones, killing 42 of the most respected leaders of that community. This is an example of how when President Obama says that our policy is to capture people, that's a big lie, because this young man, 16 years old, was in the capital city in a very public place for days with a bunch of lawyers talking about how are we going to use the courts to try to get some redress, how are we going to train some of our own citizens to be journalists, sent him back into his village to document the drone strikes. 2 days later, this is all that was left of him. And I update in this book information that came out, and we learned a lot of this when we were there as well, and Ty was there as well, that it's not just who is being killed and maimed, but it's what's happening to the whole community, how these drones are really a weapon of terrorism, of collective punishment. That imagine having something circling overhead constantly that you can see and you can hear, but you never know when it's going to hit and who it's going to hit, what that does to the whole community. And we were part of a very large movement in Pakistan that has been protesting these drones. We went out and protested in the capital city. We did a day of fasting where we were in a public place that people could come and the media could come and talk to us. And then we attempted to get up to the tribal areas. We were stopped by the government, but we went quite far and had our rally with the local people. After the ambassador told us, don't go, the Taliban are going to try to kill you. They're going to strap weapons onto donkeys and camels. And so as we go out into the stage, we're of course looking for donkeys and camels everywhere. Luckily, there weren't donkeys and camels. We didn't get blown up, but we did get a chance to be the kind of citizen diplomats that we wanted to be, to get a chance to tell a large group of people from the tribal areas that we were totally opposed to our government's policies and that we apologized on behalf of people of conscience in the United States. We also realized that the other place where the drones were increasing was in Yemen, because as some generals have elegantly called this policy, they call it a whack-a-mole policy, where you hit them in one place and they go to the next place, and you hit them in Afghanistan, they go to Pakistan, you hit them in Pakistan, they go to Yemen. Well, then the drones follow them. For those of you who don't know, Yemen is in the Arabian Peninsula on the southern part, a very poor country, per capita income $1,400, a very traditional society. In this case, we took a small delegation because we hadn't been there before, and we were told a similar thing, but that there had been a wave of kidnappings of foreigners, and we shouldn't be in a large group. So we took 7 people. We found a beautiful old culture that has amazing. This is the old city, just absolutely breathtaking. It's a UNESCO site, a very conservative culture where the vast majority of women are on the streets with a niqab almost completely covered. In fact, I would say there were less uncovered women in Sana'a than there were in Kabul. And we kind of liked the men's dress, which was very elegant. And anybody know what they're wearing here? Can't hear what you said. A knife, yes. In other places they have said a beer flask. So my partner Ty here usually goes native after a couple of days, right, Joe? He was native in Pakistan. This is him in Yemen, and they kept saying, "You're missing the dagger," and he was saying, "No, I just can't get into the dagger part." But it's a beautiful dress, and this is the human rights minister that invited us to go to Yemen. One of her main concerns has been that the majority of people in Guantanamo are from Yemen, and this includes the majority of people who've been cleared for release. And she thought it was important for us to come, and actually encouraged us to do a protest outside the U.S. Embassy in Sana'a, which we did. We heard very tragic stories from all of the families that we met with, including this young girl who is 12 years old, was in her mother's womb when her father here was captured. The only communication she's had is that in recent years, thanks to the Red Cross, they've been able to have a teleconference every 2 months, and she said this time her father was too weak from the hunger strike to even lift his head and be able to talk. By the way, her name is Auda. Her mother named her Auda, which means come home. We got a chance to meet drone strike victims who told us very tragic stories, like this man about how his brother was a teacher and a taxi driver to make some extra income. One day he picked up some people he didn't know in a taxi, like taxi drivers do all the time, and the next thing the family knew that he was killed with a drone strike. And he brought the children of his brother, who would never see their father again, told us about how his wife, every single day would just sob and sob and sob, and said, what is the United States? What kind of country is this? They said, in my culture, if you either make a tragic mistake or commit a bad crime, you have to atone for it some way. And you have to acknowledge your crime, you have to apologize for your crime, and you have to compensate. And we can't get the U.S. government to do any of these. Could it be that our tribal culture is a lot more evolved when it comes to justice than your U.S. justice system? Of course, we had to say yes. This was a piece of the Hellfire missile that killed his brother. We met this young man who had come to the United States. You might have seen and heard him when he had a chance to address Congress, the first time ever that Congress has heard from anybody that lives in the areas where the drones have been used, and talked about his village being so tiny you couldn't even find it on a map, and that everybody knows everybody else in that village. If there was any reason to think that somebody there was Al-Qaeda, the villagers would have picked him up, taken him into the capital, and he could have been charged and had a trial. But that is not the way it's been working, and he was just killed. This family was very interesting because we talked to the mother and the daughter, and in this particular case they told us about how the three brothers actually joined Al-Qaeda. And when they told us the story of how it happened, that one of the brothers got in trouble, ended up in prison, was terribly abused in prison, met some guys that were part of Al-Qaeda, and through that joined Al-Qaeda. Does that sound like something familiar, like that might happen in the U.S. jail? Does that sound like maybe a teenager that joins a gang? And that's really the way it was portrayed to us. And they said, instead of the U.S. coming in and internationalizing what was an internal issue, they had nothing to do with the United States. What my brother needed, she said, was rehabilitation, was some kind of job prospects, some kind of hope for the future, and certainly not to be killed by a U.S. drone. You might have heard of this case of the Al-Awlakis, the two of them who were killed from the United States, killed by U.S. drones. This is the grandfather, and he wrote a very beautiful piece in the New York Times a couple of days ago saying, all I want is for the United States to tell me, why did you kill my grandson, 16-year-old grandson. They killed his son because they said his son was a cleric who was not only preaching but involved in activities trying to kill Americans. The 16-year-old grandson was merely eating dinner one night in Yemen at a home, out at an outdoor cafe with a bunch of his teenage cousins, and they were all killed. This is a picture of the 16-year-old Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki. And I mentioned that we did a protest outside of the embassy. It was not only about the Guantanamo issue, but also about the drone issue. And a lot of the families came to join us. This was the first time that Americans had come to Yemen to show opposition to U.S. policy. Question is, how can we get away with this? What kind of model are we showing for the rest of the world? What would we do if anybody else was doing this to us? Well, we might find out very soon because we are selling these drones all over the place. Israel is the #1 exporter of drones, and China is now in the act. So is South Africa, selling these all over. This map is outdated because there are more countries now that have weaponized their drones. These are the ones that have drones that are for surveillance purposes, but they're in the process of weaponizing them. In the good old American fashion, this whole thing is being pushed by the industry, by a very strong lobby group that represents every single major weapons manufacturer in the United States. And they're not only pushing for lifting restrictions on selling drones to everywhere overseas, but they're also trying to lift restrictions on the use of drones here in the United States, which they have done very successfully because they have pushed Congress through the Drone Caucus to say by September 2015 the airspace must be opened up to drones. And in the meantime, they're giving out hundreds of permits to experiment with drones here in the United States. The biggest experiments going on are ones with drones in the hands of our increasingly militarized police departments. And this is an example outside Texas where they bragged at a press conference how these drones could be weaponized, how you could put all kinds of things like tasers and grenades onto these drones. But the funny thing in this one is while they were bragging about it and giving a test run for the drone, it crashed into the tank. So last, what can we do about this? Well, there's a lot being done, and I look forward to more discussion about this. On the local level, there are no drone resolutions being passed by communities. We were just in the county of Hudson, was it, Tig? Where the local official has introduced...
No, Duchess.
Dutchess, local official had introduced legislation county-wise to put severe restrictions on the use of drones, particularly by law enforcement agencies. And what's really exciting is at the statewide level, and this is just this crazy, strange bedfellows coming together from the left and the right that includes in some of our Midwest states very conservative farmers who don't want the EPA flying over with drones over their farmland, to progressive, pot growers who don't want their the government flying their drones, to all kinds of people who have are in the midst of passing legislation. There's 5 states that have already passed legislation restricting the use of drones, and there's dozens of them that are in the process. What happens is they get through oftentimes both houses on the statewide level, and then they get stuck on the governor's desk where the drone industry is putting a lot of lobbying and saying this is about jobs, 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 you got to veto this. And then on in terms of protesting on the international level, many of you might know of the great protests that are happening around the Hancock base here, and what a wonderful wave of arrests have been happening, and how much that's educating the community and getting the media to talk more and more about this. Well, that's happening at places all over the country, as well as regular protests at the CIA headquarters and the Pentagon, the headquarters of manufacturers, the homes of manufacturers, the homes of people like the head of the CIA. We've had a good time going to his house. A lot more of the religious community finally getting involved and saying, yes, maybe this is a moral and ethical question that we should ponder about whether killing by remote control is something that fits our values. And students are starting to get more involved to say, hey, how come every major engineering department in the United States is somehow mucked up with the military and research over this stuff, and so students trying to investigate the ties that their university has. At the international level, you'd think there'd be more of an outcry saying, hey, how can the U.S. get away with this? But of course the U.S. Would veto anything in the Security Council and strong arms other countries. But in any case, there is a serious study going on right now by the United Nations about whether the U.S. and Israel have committed war crimes and the use of these drones, and that should be coming out in the fall. And there are, I would say, just the movement is having an impact, and we can see that in a couple of ways. One is that a year ago the government didn't even admit it had a drone program. In fact, when they were taken to court by the Al-Awlaki family, they said, we don't have to, there is no drone program, what are you talking about? Anytime reporters asked, in fact, you might have seen the spokesperson, Robert Gibbs, who said, when I got the job, they said, if anybody ever asked about drones, say, what drones? Now the government has to talk about it. In fact, President Obama had to make a particularly impassioned justification for his drone program in his May 23rd speech at the National Defense University, where I happened to get a chance to go inside and ask him some questions. That one of the measures of success is the government has to talk about a program that the whole world knows exists, but they try to keep this from us, the American public, but that is the sorry state of affairs. It's also a sorry state of affairs that the progressive Democrats, who should be the ones speaking out about this issue of killing that violates our morals, our Constitution, international law, Geneva Conventions, have been, for the most part, absolutely silent on this. And we have had to look to Tea Party people like Rand Paul, or even the horrible Ted Cruz, who at the Guantanamo hearing yesterday, who said, did anybody watch that Guantanamo hearing? Well, he said to the right-wing expert, Fred Gaffney, who was one of the greatest cheerleaders for the Iraq War and on, he said to Gaffney, what is more of a violation of somebody's rights? Would it be indefinite detention and torture in Guantanamo, or would it be killing somebody by a drone? And Gaffney, to his credit, says, I'm not really an expert on moral issues. So it hasn't been the progressive Democrats by any means who are our friends on this issue, which has made it harder to mobilize. And of course, those of you who are intimately involved in the issues of mobilizing know that under the Bush years it was a hell of a lot easier to mobilize the grassroots and get hundreds of thousands of people out. Obama came in and the peace movement fizzled out. So our strength has not been in numbers, but we have been very impassioned. And so I think another indication of the success we're having is the tremendous fall in the public opinion polls about drones, because just a year ago there were 83% of Americans that said it was okay to use drones against terror suspects, which is just phenomenally disgusting. And now you fast forward and it's about 60% of Americans, and that's a significant drop in the course of about a year. And so I think that is thanks to a lot of the work that many people in this country have been doing, and of course the work of our friends overseas. So at this point, I would say, just to reiterate what Ty said, that we do have this drone summit coming up. We're very excited about it. We had one about a year and a half ago, and I think it really helped to give a push to the movement. This time we're going to try to make it more global and have people come in from other countries. We just got word from Cornel West that he's going to come and join us, and we have some of the best experts on these issues. And we also have a very strong cultural component, because we think in terms of especially reaching the younger folks, there's been a lot of great work being done to come up with music and spoken word and all kinds of cultural manifestations about why drones are not really part of the vision that we have for our idea of the future of the country and the world we want to live in. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Medea. We have an ambitious plan for the remaining hour of the program here. We're trying to accomplish two things. First is we're going to have about a half hour of Q&A with questions directed to Medea. We're going to start with 2 or 3 that OFS kind of collectively prepared, and then open it to the audience. And then we want to take the last half hour to more talk amongst ourselves about what activism is occurring at the grassroots level around the drone issue, and how we can connect some of the organizing and activism that we're doing on different issues with drones, and make some of these connections that Jess and others have talked about. So Ron and I are going to co-facilitate the Q&A portion. So Ron, do you want to start with one of the questions that we prepared?
Yes. Hi. So one of the main things, as you've heard about OFS, is that we try to bring different sorts of movements together. That's like one of the biggest goals. And so we intentionally framed today's talk in the context of patriarchy. Your book talks about how the U.S. neither tracks or acknowledges the hundreds of or thousands of women and children who are killed by drones. And this practice as a whole also seems highly reflective of a mentality of dominance and violence. You've intentionally organized with Code Pink as a women-led activist groups. And can you comment on the role that patriarchy plays in the use of drones and the importance of women being at the forefront of our response to it?
Well, everything about the drone is patriarchal. It's very phallic looking. Let's start with that. Let's look at some of the names of these drones. I mean, they don't even try to hide it. There's the Predator drone. There's the Reaper drone. There is a Stalker drone. Yeah, a Stalker drone. Switchblade drone. The insignia, what do you call that military thing that they for the drone? Yeah, the emblem. They use the Grim Reaper, and yeah, it's gross. And So I would say that it's a patriarchal response, in my opinion, designed to keep war going. And that if you look at who is benefiting from this, it's big corporations, and it's the military itself, and this revolving door between the heads of corporations, military corporations that are basically all men, and the generals and the tops of the military, and they're basically all men. And they've got what was it called, a racket going? And so I think it's very clear that this is a male-dominated way of viewing and dealing with the world, and it just perpetuates violence. That I don't say that all women are just wonderful nonviolent people, and if we ruled the world it would just be fantastic. But I do think that there is a big difference in general between women and men on this issue, and I saw the proof of that today, where there was a poll that came out by Pew, and it showed a huge gap between men and women on this issue, a bigger gap than is traditional between men and women on issues of war. And I'm trying to remember the name of it was so great, because the title was Women More Opposed to Drones Than Men, and after it said something like around drones, men are from Mars and women are from another planet not ruled by a god of perpetual war. So there's other, I'll just see if there's other ways that I wanted to answer this issue. Well, I think an issue that we have to just throw out there is to say that a lot of the post 9/11 violence has been done in the name of helping women. And Connie, you know this well from your work in Afghanistan, and Joe, you know that some of the groups that we met with, the only ones that we met with in Pakistan who were for the drones were the women's organizations. And so this is a very tricky issue, and we have to do that. It's one of the reasons why Code Pink thought it was important for women to speak out, was to counter some of this justification that the invasion of Afghanistan or the drones in Iraq trying to get rid of the Taliban or Al-Qaeda is to help liberate women. And there are women's organizations that have been very split over this issue. To this day, like the Afghan women's organizations, there are some that are pro-US occupation and intervention and some that are anti. So it's an important issue for women to get more clarity about how do women liberate themselves. Can it be on the backs of US weapons? And to speak out as women on this.
US weapons and men.
Thank you. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on the role that race and racism plays in justifying the use of drones. I wonder if you can give us a sense of the percentage of victims of US drones who are people of color, primarily of Middle Eastern or African descent, and if you think that that plays an important role in sort of othering and justifying this use of violence against the individuals that we tend to target with drone attacks.
I think the percentage is probably 99.99, and I'd say it's not 100 because there were 2 Americans that were killed by mistake, 2 US soldiers, white soldiers, killed by drones. This is a policy of killing people of color in mostly poor countries and mostly poor people.